If you were online on the 21st of October 2016, you will remember that the internet simply stopped working. Twitter would not load for you, Reddit would not load, Spotify, Netflix, GitHub, nothing. Nobody had hacked Twitter, nobody had hacked Netflix. Those companies were running perfectly well that morning. What was attacking them was a crowd of roughly 600,000 small devices sitting quietly in ordinary homes and offices. Security cameras, video recorders, home routers, baby monitors, devices exactly like the one that is probably in your house right now and which you have not thought about since the day you plugged it in. In the next half hour, I will show you exactly how that happened, the actual mechanism step by step, because it is far simpler than you expect. You will see why the flaw was not really a flaw, why publishing the attack code made things worse on purpose, and what the court records show. And by the end, you will have 4 things to check on your own network tonight. All 3. All under 10 minutes. First, the thing that actually went down that Friday, because almost every retelling gets this wrong. The websites were fine. What broke was the service that tells your computer where those websites are. That service is called DNS, the Domain Name System. And the cleanest way to think about it is as the phone book of the internet. When you type a website name into your browser, your computer does not know what that means. Names are for humans. Machines need numbers, an address that identifies a specific server somewhere in the world. So before your browser can fetch anything at all, it has to ask a question. What is the number for this name? That question goes to a DNS provider. The provider answers with the address. Only then does your browser go and fetch the page. Which means DNS sits in front of everything, not beside it, in front of it. If the phone book does not answer, it does not matter how healthy the destination is because nobody can find out where it lives. The company under attack that day was called Dyn, and Dyn was a major DNS provider for a very long list of well-known services. So one target, sitting in front of hundreds of others, knock it over, and every site relying on it becomes unreachable at the same time, even though not one of those sites has been touched. That is the first lesson of this episode, and it applies far beyond cameras. The most damaging thing to attack is rarely the thing you care about. It is the boring shared service that the thing you care about quietly depends on. Now the second piece. The attack itself was a distributed denial of service, a DDoS. There is no cleverness in the DDoS. There is no break-in. You are not stealing anything or getting inside anything. You are simply sending so many requests at a service that it cannot answer the real ones anymore. It is not a lockpick. It is a crowd so large that nobody legitimate can get through the door. And the only thing that makes a DDoS powerful is scale. One machine sending requests is nothing. 100,000 machines sending requests simultaneously from 100,000 different addresses all over the world is very hard to filter because each individual request looks ordinary. So the entire game is, where do you get 100,000 machines? For decades, the answer was infected personal computers, slow to build and constantly cleaned up by antivirus software and operating system updates. And then somebody noticed there was a much better supply, sitting in living rooms, that nobody was defending at all. It is worth being precise about why small home devices are so much better for this than personal computers. Because every single reason is something the manufacturer did deliberately and for good commercial motives. A personal computer is watched. It has an operating system that updates itself, often without asking. It usually has security software. And crucially, it has a user sitting in front of it who will notice if it becomes slow, or if the fan runs constantly, or if something odd appears on screen. A camera has none of that. There is no screen to display a warning. There is no user sitting in front of it. There is no antivirus for a video recorder. It is powered on 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, because that is its job. Its internet connection is permanent for the same reason. And it has one behavior its owner expects, a light is on, and the app shows a picture. As long as those two things remain true, absolutely nothing will prompt anybody to look closer. A compromised camera keeps showing the picture. It keeps recording. The owner's experience of it does not change in any way at all. So you have a machine with a processor and a network connection, running permanently, unmonitored, unpatched, and unable to tell anybody that anything is wrong. From the point of view of somebody assembling an army, that is not a worse computer than a laptop. It is a considerably better one. Here's the part I really want you to understand, because it is the heart of the episode and it is almost insultingly simple. The software that built this botnet was called Mirai. And Mirai did not use a sophisticated exploit. It did not use a 0-day. It did not attack encryption. Mirai logged in. First, that is it. It logged in using usernames and passwords that were printed in the manuals. To see why that works, you need one piece of history. Small internet-connected devices, cameras, recorders, routers, needed a way for a technician to configure them remotely. So many of them shipped with a remote access service switched on by default. Often that service was Telnet, a protocol from the early years of networking. Old, simple, and with no encryption whatsoever. And to make installation painless, the manufacturer would set a factory username and password, something like admin and admin, or root and a short number sequence. The same one on every unit that came off the line. The manual would tell you to change it. Almost nobody ever did. Many devices did not even force the question during setup. So picture what that means at scale. Millions of devices, sold worldwide, each with a remote login service switched on, each accepting a password that is publicly documented and identical across the entire product line. Mirai's method followed directly. It scanned the internet continuously, looking for devices with that remote service open. When it found one, it tried a short list of factory username and password combinations, a few dozen pairs, drawn from the default credentials of common device makers. If a pair worked, it was in. It loaded itself onto the device, and that device immediately began scanning for more devices, which meant the thing grew by itself, faster and faster, with nobody steering it. The research team that reconstructed all of this afterwards, a large group of academics and engineers who published their analysis at the USENIX Security Symposium in 2017, traced its growth across 7 months and put the peak at around 600,000 simultaneously infected devices. Now, the critical point. Notice that nothing here was broken. Every one of those logins was, technically, a correct login. The password supplied was the password the device expected. The service being used was the service the manufacturer had switched on deliberately. There was no vulnerability in the sense that word usually means. There was a design decision. Ship it working. Ship it open. Let the customer lock it later. Repeated across an entire industry for years because it reduced support calls and it did not show up anywhere on the box. And here is the detail that made this so hard to clean up afterwards. Mirai lived in the device's memory, not in its permanent storage. Switch the device off and on, and the infection was gone. Which sounds like good news and is not, because within minutes, the same scanning that found it the first time found it again, and the password was still the factory password. You could disinfect your camera as many times as you liked. The door was still unlocked. And there is one more structural detail that made this effectively unfixable, which most coverage skips entirely. It is about who actually made these devices. A very large share of the world's cheap cameras and video recorders are not designed by the company whose name is on the front. They are built around a component supplied by a small number of manufacturers with the software already on it. That component gets sold on to dozens of different brands who put their own casing around it, print their own logo, write their own manual, and sell it in their own market. Which means one default password, chosen once by an engineer at a supplier most buyers have never heard of, can end up on devices sold under dozens of unrelated brand names in dozens of countries for years. Now think about what fixing that requires. The person who could correct it is at the supplier. The person the customer can complain to is the brand. The brand may not have written a line of that software and may have no ability to change it. And the customer has no way of knowing any of this. 2 cameras from 2 completely different companies at 2 different prices in 2 different shops can be the same device underneath with the same weakness. That is why researchers, when Mirai spread, could not simply publish a list and have it fixed. There was no single manufacturer to notify, no update channel that reached the devices, and in many cases, no company still selling the product at all. The weakness was not in a product, it was in a supply chain, as supply chains do not issue patches. The first time the world saw what this thing could do, the target was one man's website. On the 20th of September 2016, the site belonging to the security journalist Brian Krebs was hit with a sustained flood of traffic measured at more than 600 gigabits per second. That number needs translating, because gigabits per second means very little on its own. It was, at that time, among the largest attacks that had ever been publicly recorded. It was not an increment. It was a step change. And it was aimed at a personal blog, not a bank, not a government, not a stock exchange. One journalist who wrote about cybercrime. Krebs' site had been protected, for free, by a large content delivery company. Under an attack of that size, that arrangement stopped being viable, and the protection was withdrawn. The site went dark. Think carefully about what that demonstrated, because it was the real message of September 2016. A collection of home cameras and video recorders, devices whose owners were asleep and had no idea any of this was happening, had generated enough force to remove a journalist from the internet and to make a major infrastructure provider decide the cost of defending him was too high. That is the moment the security world understood that the balance had shifted. The attack power available to an ordinary person had just jumped by an order of magnitude, and the source of that power was consumer electronics that nobody had any authority to fix. You cannot patch a camera you do not own. You cannot force a factory in another country to change a default password on units it shipped 3 years ago. You often cannot even identify the manufacturer, because the same hardware gets rebadged and resold under dozens of brand names. There is a second thing that attack revealed, and it is uncomfortable enough that it tends to get left out. Defending against an attack of that size is expensive, genuinely expensive. It requires enormous spare network capacity sitting idle, waiting, paid for in case it is needed. Which means protection at that scale is a product, sold by a small number of very large companies, and someone has to be paying for it. For a bank or a retailer, that cost is simply part of doing business. For an individual writing about cybercrime, it was being absorbed by a company as a public service, right up until the bill became unreasonable. So the practical result of Mirai was that the cost of silencing an inconvenient writer fell to almost nothing, while the cost of keeping him online rose sharply. That asymmetry is the thing to notice. The attacker spent no money at all. The electricity was paid for by 600,000 strangers who did not know they were contributing. The defender had to buy capacity to match. One side's cost scale with the number of hijacked devices, which is effectively free. The other side's cost scale with the size of the flood. This is why denial of service refuses to go away, and why it is a governance problem rather than a technical one. There is no clever defense that changes that arithmetic. There is only the question of who pays. And then, 10 days after the Krebs attack, the situation got dramatically worse in a way that was entirely deliberate. On the 30th of September 2016, somebody using the name Anna-senpai posted the complete source code for Mirai on a public forum called Hack Forums. Not a description of it, not a summary. The working code, free, downloadable by anyone. If you have never seen this move before, it looks insane. Why would you hand your weapon to the entire world? There is a well-understood logic to it, and it is worth knowing because it comes up repeatedly in this field. When a tool is unique, every attack made with it points back to one owner. Investigators can follow the code itself as a signature. The moment the code is public, that signature is worthless. Now there are hundreds of copies run by hundreds of unrelated people, and any given attack could be any of them. Publication does not just muddy the water, it destroys the entire method of attribution. So the release was, functionally, camouflage, and the immediate consequence was exactly what you would expect. Copies appeared everywhere, variants were written, different groups took the code, adjusted the credential list, adjusted the attack methods, and pointed the result at whatever they felt like. The supply of vulnerable devices had not changed at all. What changed was the number of people who could now command them. Which brings us to 3 weeks later. The the 21st of October, 2016, a Friday. The attack on Dyn came in waves. Not one continuous flood, but a sequence of them, separated by hours, which is its own kind of message. It said, "This is not an accident, and it is not over." The effects spread outward exactly as the structure of DNS predicts. Users across large parts of the United States and then well beyond found that a long list of major services had simply stopped responding. Twitter, Reddit, Spotify, Netflix, GitHub, many others. None of them had been attacked. Every one of them was working. They had just become unfindable because the phone book in front of them was underwater. And the crowd doing it was made of security cameras and digital video recorders in ordinary homes. I want to hold that image in place for a moment because it is genuinely one of the strangest things that has ever happened on the internet, and familiarity has worn the strangeness off it. People had bought cameras to make their homes safer. Those same cameras, without a single one of their owners knowing, were pointed collectively at the infrastructure of the internet and used to knock a large part of it offline for a day. The device did not need to be interesting. It did not need to contain anything valuable. Nobody was watching the footage or stealing the recordings. The device was valuable purely because it was connected, powered on permanently, unmonitored, and reachable. And I want to draw out something about the shape of the damage, because it explains why this kind of attack keeps working and why it is so hard to hold anyone responsible. Every individual contribution was trivial. A single camera sending requests is generating an amount of traffic so small that its owner's internet connection would never even register it. No bill went up. No connection slowed noticeably. Nothing broke in anybody's house. The harm existed only in the aggregate, and the aggregate was assembled from 600,000 contributions, each of which was individually harmless and individually invisible. Which means there is no point in the whole system where a normal person could reasonably have detected their own involvement. That pattern is worth recognizing because it is not unique to cameras. It is the same shape as a great deal of modern automated abuse, enormous total harm assembled out of individually negligible pieces, spread across people who have done nothing wrong and cannot tell that anything is happening. And it defeats our normal way of assigning responsibility. Nobody in that crowd of 600,000 was negligent in any way an ordinary person would recognize. They bought a camera and plugged it in. The manufacturer shipped a working product that did what it advertised. The retailer sold a legitimate item. The owner followed the instructions in the box. Every party behaved reasonably by their own standards, and the outcome was that a large part of the internet went dark on a Friday. That is what a systemic failure looks like from the inside. Not villains, a default setting multiplied by scale. That is the inversion at the center of this episode, and it is the thing to carry into every other system you use. You have been trained to ask, what is inside this device that somebody might want? Photos, documents, card numbers. The correct question for anything connected is different. It is, what could this device be used to do? To somebody else, if it were not under my control? A camera with nothing valuable on it is still an internet connection, a processor, and a permanent power supply, sitting on a network, waiting. So who did it, and why? And here we move on to solid ground, because this ended in a courtroom, and the record is public. On the 8th of December, 2017, 3 men, Paras Jha, Josiah White, and Dalton Norman, pleaded guilty in the District of Alaska to conspiracy to violate the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act in connection with operating the Mirai Botnet. Those are guilty pleas entered in a United States federal court, and they are a matter of public record. I am not speculating about any of it. On the 18th of September, 2018, they were sentenced by the Chief District Judge. Each received 5 years of probation, 2,500 hours of community service, and an order to pay $127,000 in restitution. No prison. And the reason for that is also in the record. Federal investigators told the court that the 3 had provided extraordinary cooperation, helping identify other cybercriminals and helping prevent further large attacks. Now the motive, which is documented in the case, and which is the detail that makes people stop and stare. It was Minecraft. Minecraft servers are run by individuals and small businesses. Players choose which server to join, and a server that is offline loses its players, often permanently, to a competitor. That creates a market. There is money in knocking a rival server offline, and there's money in selling protection against exactly that. The court record describes botnet-powered denial-of-service attacks in that world, and a related click fraud scheme run using the same infrastructure. So, a commercial dispute inside a video game ecosystem produced a tool that, weeks later, in the hands of whoever downloaded the published source code, made a large part of the internet unreachable for a day. That gap between the pettiness of the motive and the size of the consequence is the most important thing in this episode. Because it tells you that you cannot reason about your own risk by asking whether you are an interesting target. Nobody chose your camera. Nobody assessed you. A scanner walked the entire internet, address by address, tried a factory password, and your device answered. Being uninteresting protects you from a person deciding to attack you. It protects you from nothing at all when the attacker is a program that has decided nothing whatsoever. So what actually changed? Some real things, and one big thing that did not. The law moved, eventually. California passed Senate Bill 327, the Security of Connected Devices Law, which took effect on the 1st of January 2020. It requires connected devices sold in the state to have reasonable security features, and it specifically targets the shared factory password, either a unique pre-programmed password for each device or a forced setup step where the user must set their own before the device can be used. The United Kingdom went further. Under the Product Security and Telecommunications Infrastructure Act, security requirements came into force on the 29th of April 2024, making the UK the first country to ban the sale of consumer-connected products with guessable default passwords. That law also requires manufacturers to publish a point of contact for reporting security problems and to state how long a device will keep receiving security updates. Penalties run up to £10 million or 4% of global revenue, whichever is higher. Those are genuinely good rules, and they attack the precise mechanism this episode is about. Now, the part that did not change. None of that legislation reaches backwards. Devices sold before those dates are still out there, still powered on, still running the firmware they shipped with. And the deeper problem is support lifetime. A camera is a physical object. People keep them for 5, 8, 10 years. Far longer than the manufacturer keeps writing updates for them, and in many cases far longer than the brand on the front continues to exist. So the honest position today is this. The specific trick Mirai used, factory passwords over an open remote service, is much harder on a device bought new in a regulated market this year than it was in 2016. And there are still enormous numbers of older devices connected to the internet where it works exactly as well as it ever did. And there is a subtler shift that the laws did not address at all, which is where the risk has actually moved. Manufacturers largely stopped leaving open remote login services on devices because it was indefensible and eventually illegal. But customers still wanted to see their cameras from their phones while away from home. So the industry solved it a different way. Instead of you connecting inwards to the camera now connects outwards to the manufacturer's servers, and your phone connects to those same servers. That genuinely closes the Mirai-style hole. There is no longer an open door on your network for a scanner to find. From the outside, there is nothing to knock on. But look at what it replaced the hole with. Your camera now maintains a permanent connection to a company's infrastructure, and your video passes through it. Which means the security of your living room is no longer mainly a question about your device or your password. It is a question about that company, how they store the footage, who inside can access it, how long they keep it, what happens in a breach, and what happens if they are acquired or shut down. That is not necessarily worse. A well-run cloud service will patch faster than any camera owner ever will, and for most households, that is a real improvement. But it is a completely different question, and it deserves to be asked consciously rather than inherited by default. In 2016, the risk was that your device was reachable by anyone. Today, the risk is concentrated in whoever holds the footage. The failure mode moved. It did not disappear. And there is one more thing that has not moved at all, which is the sheer number of these devices. In 2016, connected cameras and recorders were still a relatively new category in ordinary homes. Since then, they have become normal. Doorbells, indoor cameras, smart speakers with microphones, televisions that talk to the internet, plugs, thermostats, locks. The average household now runs a small fleet of permanently connected computers, almost none of which have a screen, and almost none of which the owner has ever logged into directly. You do not administer them. You do not log into them. In most cases, you could not name their manufacturer without going to look, and yet each one is a computer with a network connection sitting inside your house, running software that somebody else decided when to stop maintaining. So even as each individual device has become somewhat harder to hijack, the number of devices sitting on home networks has grown enormously. The pool did not drain. It got deeper while the water got a little cleaner. Which is why the useful question is no longer whether a particular gadget is secure. It is whether you know what is actually on your network at all. And most people, if they are honest, could not produce the list. And producing it is not difficult. Nearly every home router has an administration page that lists every device currently connected to it by name and address. Most people have never opened it. The first time you do, the usual reaction is not alarm at a single dangerous device. It is surprise at how many things are on the list at all. Which is why the practical advice in this episode is not wait for the law. It is go and look at your own network because you are the only person who can. Nobody is coming to audit your living room. There is no inspector for this, and there is no update that quietly arrives and fixes a device whose manufacturer stopped caring years ago. 4 things, all free, all doable tonight, and I have put them in order of how much protection you get per minute spent. First, change the password on every connected device you own and do it properly, not the app account password, the password on the device itself in its own settings. If you have a camera, a video recorder, a router, or a baby monitor that you have never logged into directly, that is the one to start with. If it still has the password from the manual, it is exactly the device this whole episode was about. Second, turn off remote access unless you genuinely use it. Look in the device settings for anything called remote access, cloud access, P2P, UPnP, or port forwarding, and switch off what you do not need. If you never watch your camera from outside your house, it does not need to be reachable from outside your house. This one change removes most of the attack surface described in this episode. And be suspicious of anything that was switched on for you. Convenience features are frequently enabled by default, because a device that works immediately out of the box generates fewer support calls than a device that is secure out of the box. Third, put your connected devices on the guest network. Nearly every home router made in the last decade can run a second, separate wireless network. Put the cameras, the speakers, the televisions, and the plugs on that one, and keep your computers and phones on the main one. Then, if a device is taken over, it is sitting in a room with no doors into the rest of your house. It takes about 10 minutes, it costs nothing, and it is the one change in this list that keeps working even when you get one of the other 3 wrong. Fourth, before you buy anything connected, find out how long it gets security updates. Under the UK rules, that period has to be published, so for many products, you can now simply read it. If a manufacturer will not say, that is your answer, you are buying a device that will be unmaintained while it is still perfectly functional, which is the exact condition that made 600,000 of them available in 2016. And the idea underneath all 4, which is worth more than any of them individually, your security is not only about what you can lose. It is also about what your equipment can be made to do to other people. That is an unusual way to think about security, and it is the one that matters at scale. A network of individually harmless devices is exactly what took a large part of the internet off the air, and every one of those devices belonged to somebody who was not doing anything wrong. The owners of those cameras lost nothing that night. Their footage was not stolen. Their homes were not entered. Most of them never found out. They just quietly supplied the force that took a large part of the internet off the air because a device they had stopped thinking about was still awake, still connected, and still answering to the password printed in its manual. Next week on Systems You Use Every Day, we stay on your home network and go after the thing you trust most without ever having examined it: Wi-Fi. What the encryption on your wireless network actually protects, what it has never protected, and why the padlock you are picturing is guarding a much smaller area than you think. Subscribe, and I will see you next week.